Warning, this podcast contains spoilers for the finale of House of the Dragon, so watch out. To celebrate the last round of Ask the Maester, we have emerged from the citadel to answer your questions.
Jamie asks, early in Game of Thrones, Jorah tells Dany that the people of Westeros don't really care who sits the throne. Do common people care about Aegon versus Rhaenyra?
I think that is a good perspective, and honestly, no. If we use, medieval culture, European medieval culture, like as a kind of guide here, national identity was not really a thing. And moreover, the small folk are worried about tilling their crops, working as craftspeople, whether this person is their lord or that person is their lord or this person is their king or queen, their lives stay the same. Mm-hmm. The income inequality is like an unimaginable gulf. There is no upward mobility. Mm-mm. Their position will never change no matter who is in charge.
The boot is always on the neck, no matter who wears it.
The boot is there, and it is very strongly on their neck. And what they care about is which one of these people is going to make my life actively worse. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, that's really the only way they care. They truly are fearful of the people who rule over them and just looking to live life as quietly and safely as possible.
Taryn asks, what was Daemon singing?
Daemon was singing a Valyrian lullaby titled, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce this correctly, but Haros Bartosi, which translates in English with three heads, words by Ty Meckel and David J. Peterson, who is the linguist who has designed all the languages in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. And the lyrics translated in English are fire breather, winged leader, but two heads to a third sing. From my voice the fires have spoken and the price has been paid with blood magic. With words of flame, with clear eyes to bind the three, to you I sing. As one we gather, and with three heads we shall fly as we were destined, beautifully freely.
Okay, so I need to say something then off the bat. I didn't know those were the lyrics. I got a message from one of our listeners, Whitney Jane, who told me a theory that just blew my mind, which was the idea that the death of Visenya could have been a blood sacrifice to allow Daemon to have two dragons. And with the lyrics to this song and the idea of the three-headed dragon, do you think there's a possibility that is the case? Because I had no idea that that's what the lyrics meant.
Whoa!
I thought that was just so wild.
That is very interesting, and I will need to process it. But... blood magic was part of Old Valyria, certainly was part of the culture of magic, as, Viserys mentioned himself. There are rumors that, in other parts of Essos, like Qohorik, as they were trying to create their own version of Valyrian steel, a lot of the experiments that they were doing were with blood sacrifices to create this, magic metal similar to Valyrian steel. So I think that's a very interesting theory. That's all. I think that's a lot to think about. That's a really interesting one.
Okay, so we got some Valyrian steel questions.
Yes.
How strong is Valyrian steel? How does it compare to Beskar, adamantium,
It's funny. It's great.
You're the man to ask.
Yeah.
And then that was Ben. And then James asks, where did everyone get their Valyrian steel swords?
Valyrian steel it's very comparable to Beskar and adamantium. I'll get to that in a second. It is, lighter than regular crucible steel and is much, much, much stronger. Basically indestructible once it's forged and hammered and folded into shape. The blades are said to never lose their edge. These are the weapons that are around right now are hundreds, 300 years old, something like that, some 400-ish years old. And the fact that they never need to be sharpened tells you that they're essentially indestructible, right? Mm-hmm. Very similar to adamantium in that way. Adamantium also, once the molten metal cools, indestructible. Now, the technology for creating Valyrian steel has, of course, been lost, but there are very highly skilled artisans in Qohorik who, I guess, know certain spells that allow them to rework the metal. And, we saw that in Game of Thrones when Tywin Lannister hired Tobomot from Essos, although I don't think they say his name. They may say his name in the episode, to melt down the Stark family sword ice into 2 swords. That was made possible because, again, those Tobomot knows certain spells and knows how to do that. Now that also, those secrets in Kahoric, the secrets of reworking Valyrian steel, are tightly guarded. A maester went over there to kind of study them, and he was like publicly whipped several times because he was like getting too close to the secret. Vibranium is significantly different in that it has that unique property of absorbing and storing energy, kinetic energy in particular, and that it is then able to like release it. Also in the movie version, you see that it's just in everything. It's in Wakanda in particular. It's in the plants. It's in the organic matter, and that this is also forms the basis for their very advanced technology. I would imagine that vibranium is in Wakandan, computer chips, et cetera, and that has some sort of special properties. Of course, Valyrian steel doesn't work that way. Also, vibranium and adamantium different than Valyrian steel in that there are several versions of both of those metals, right? Yes. There's the Wakandan vibranium, there's the Savage Land vibranium, and there's different versions. Adamantium, there's several versions, not to mention the multiversal versions of those, so it's different. How did they get into Westeros? There had been contact and trade relationships between the kingdoms of Westeros and Old Valyria before the Doom. Dragonstone was the entry point for this, the westernmost outpost of the Valyrian freehold. We don't exactly know when the blades started coming in, but based on clues from the books, you can date it to like a couple of 100 years before the Doom, which was 114 years before Aegon's conquest. The clues are that just for example, in Game of Thrones, Heartsbane, which is the Tarly family sword, is mentioned as being, quote, nearly 500 years old. And then in Kat's chapter of Game of Thrones, she's watching Ned in the Godswood clean off ice after having decapitated the guy who fled from the Night's Watch. And she says that ice is, quote, said to be 400 years old. So using that as a window and then counting back, you can say, approximately 314 BC, something like that. Bright Roar, which was the Lannister family sword that got lost because some loony Lannister decided to sail off into the Sunset Sea with it, came into their possession like 100 years before the Doom. So let's call it about 200 years before the Doom that stuff started to come in. Okay,
Whit asks, a good fun question here. How common was incest in Old Valyria?
We don't know, but Old Valyria was an oligarchy, meaning that like 30 or so dragon-riding families basically ruled the city. So you can think about it as the Roman Republic, with senators and consuls and stuff like that. No actual like figurehead leader. And all these people kind of like jostling for position. My guess would be incest would happen, of course, because again, that dragon-riding blood, you want to keep it safe. But that there would also be significant intermarriage between those families to the point that I'm sure they were all cousins by the point that Doom happened. Like they were all related somehow. So I guess you could say probably a lot of incest, depending on how you think of cousins in terms of incest.
Okay, this one. Maine asks, please connect the family tree dots from Viserys to Daenerys.
God. So this is... there are some really great family trees online, and this is really interesting. So if we start with Viserys, Viserys' daughter is Rhaenyra. Then now, semi-spoilers here, okay? Rhaenyra's... we got Aegon, right, as king right now, concurrent with Rhaenyra, and there's some controversy over who's going to rule. But later on, spoiler, don't listen to this if you don't want to know, Aegon the Third, a.k.a. Aegon the Younger, goes and becomes king. You can start listening now. I don't. If you didn't listen then, you can start listening now. He then has a son named Baelor and Daeron. Daeron then becomes king. He dies during the conquest of Dorne. He's followed by Baelor. And then Aegon the Fourth succeeds after Baelor. So those are all the grandsons of Queen Rhaenyra, the great-grandchildren of Viserys. Aegon the Fourth then has a son named Daeron II. Daeron II then has a son named Maekar, who becomes king. Maekar then has several very, very interesting sons, including Aemon, a.k.a. Maester Aemon, Targaryen, and then the eventual king, Aegon, a.k.a. Aegon V. Aegon V then has a son named Jaehaerys, who's Jaehaerys II. Jaehaerys II then has a son named Aerys, who becomes Aerys II, a.k.a. the Mad King. Aerys then has a bunch of children, including Daenerys Targaryen. So if we go from Viserys, that is like the 8th great-grandchild. Daenerys is the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter of King Viserys.
Okay, Miriam asks, I've been thinking about the saying, every time a Targaryen is born, the gods toss a coin. Does this come up in Fire and Blood at all?
It doesn't. That was a quote attributed by Barristan Selmy to King Jaehaerys II, the father of the Mad King, King Aerys. This is when Barristan is explaining to Daenerys, how her father was actually kind of insane. And the coin flip metaphor is pretty unfair. There's no doubt that because of rampant incest and, of course, the way immense wealth and power warps a person's moral compass, that the Targaryens were really eccentric. But I think only a handful of them were people that you could truly say were mad, okay? Usually they include King Baelor, aka Baelor the Blessed, who was just an extreme and fervent follower of the Faith of the Seven. He burned books. He fucking crawled to Dorne on his hands and knees. He was now, I think other people would say maybe he was just very, very devout, but certainly that's so. Again, there is one that, depending on how you read it, is either just a very, very extremely devout guy or actually insane. Prince Rhaegal, son of Daeron II, was known to be mad. Aerion, a.k.a. Aerion Brightflame, the son of Maekar, brother of Maester Aemon Targaryen, brother of Aegon V, thought he was a dragon made flesh and wanted to turn himself into a dragon and decided he would drink wildfire and that would turn him into a dragon. And of course he died. I think you can say canonically that guy was nuts. And then of course Aerys Targaryen, the Mad King. So that's 4 out of multiple, out of dozens of Targaryens. I wouldn't throw Helena in there, for instance. So I think that it's a little bit of, it's an unfair saying, but not one that was really around during the events that we're watching in House of the Dragon. This would come much, much later.
Hannah asks, good question. Yeah. How did Daemon and Rhaenyra find out about Luke's death so fast?
It's a good question. I don't know. Again, Storm's End is quite close to Dragonstone. It's right there. And I would assume, since many, many, many people witnessed this, the argument in Storm's End between Aemond and Luke, and it would not take Aemond that long to fly back to King's Landing and give the news, and also assuming that Daemon, as he said, has numerous contacts in the city.
Yeah.
That there's a bunch of ways that word could have come, either through Daemon's contacts in the City Watch, his various spies, someone that is friendly to them in Storm's End could have leaked the news. There were just a lot of witnesses to that. Yeah. It's unclear, but it's certainly not, it's not unthinkable that they would have got that news that quickly. That news will spread very, very fast.
Yeah. Derek says, I was a little surprised that the Greens offered Aemond as a match for the Baratheon daughter. Was I wrong to perceive that the Baratheons were not really heavy hitters in terms of influence in Westeros?
Oh, no, they're big-time heavy hitters. They're one of the great houses, and meaning the most powerful, influential houses in the realm, to which multiple lords, swear their allegiance to these great houses. So that's like the Baratheons, the Starks, the Aarons, the Lannisters, etc. Like, they're a big, big deal. And Orys Baratheon, who is the founder of House Baratheon, was placed at Storm's End because of Aegon the Conqueror's largesse. They were very, very, very close friends and companions. And Storm's End was formerly and for centuries the seat of the Durand and Storm Kings, and that line ended during Aegon's conquest. And Aegon, because was a good, chill bro, was like, Orys, you're my guy. It's, by the way, rumored that Orys is like a bastard brother to Aegon also, so may have some Targaryen lineage. And so, the Baratheons owe a lot to the Targaryens. And it's honestly crazy that Boros repays them like this. But also they're legitimately a big deal. They're a very, very big deal. And they are a powerful, they are the great house that is closest to King's Landing. So you definitely want to secure their support if you're at King's Landing. They're a big deal.
And finally, the last Ask the Maester question of this season comes from Michael. And he says, we know that Dany's baby with Khal Drogo was scaled like a dragon. Is there some connection between Targaryens and dragons?
That's a great question. So, Valyrian legend said that the Dragon Lords were, quote, this is from World of Ice and Fire, quote, descended from dragons and kin to those they now controlled. So that's what the Valyrians said about themselves, were that they were somehow like the evolution of dragons, the human evolution of dragons, and that they were all somewhat the same. Now, you mentioned Dany's stillborn baby from Khal Drogo and how it was born, I don't want to say deformed, but in this really unique, strange way that certainly makes you think about a dragon. Maegor the Cruel, throughout his numerous attempts to have kids and produce an heir, produced several children that were deformed in a very similar way. One was described as being eyeless with small wings. So maybe there's something to the legend. Maybe there's something to it. That certainly we understand that the Targaryen blood, and we would imagine the Dragon Lord blood of old Valyria, was important to why dragons listen to humans. So maybe there is some kind of shared lineage, magical shared lineage that has yet to be revealed. But certainly these very interesting births do suggest that. That's it for the last Ask the Maester of this season. Thank you all for submitting questions. If you're waiting on answers or you didn't get your questions answered, I'm going to be emailing people back over the course of the next few days and weeks. So look for that.